Hello everyone, welcome to today's recipe. We're going to make a beef and veggie quinoa dish, and we're going to make this in the electric cooker. You could probably also do that on the stove top if you have a nice big saucepan. Welcome back for those of you who have joined us before, The Lazy Kitchen. This is the place for those of us who try to put healthy food on a budget on the table without spending too much time or energy cooking. 3 basic recipes, as always. Lazy, 10 minutes. We use the iPad timer to make sure we hold ourselves accountable. Little to no prep, little to no cleanup. We're going to use smart hacks of still maintaining good quality ingredients without spending a lot of time. Second recipe is thrifty. We want to remain affordable to make a meal for several people. I'm going to tell you where I get my ingredients and actually at what cost. This is a more increasingly important discussion these days with increasing food prices. And last rule is healthy. We're going to define a healthy meal as a complete all-in-one meal that incorporates a really good protein, a healthy source of starch. In my case, all my recipes are going to be gluten-free by the virtue of the fact I have celiac. And we're going to add at least a couple of vegetables. That's often the hardest thing to do in an all-in-one recipe. So today, actually, we're going to have more than 2 vegetables. And so, yay, sky's the limit for the veggies. So let's talk about what you'll need for the recipe today. I'm going to use my all-in-one electric multifunction cooker. There's several brands. I happen to have an old 6-quart Instapot. Basically, if you're going to do it in something like this, you need to have a saute or hot cooking, a hot temperature cooking function to brown your meat and your onions initially. In this case, we're not going to really use the slow cooking function today. I'll talk in just a second about why when we're using the quinoa, but you could also use a stovetop, something like a good saucepan that doesn't stick too much. So we're going to use that. We're just going to use some plain olive oil as a browning oil. You know, as you can tell, we go through a lot of that in my house. For the protein, we're going to use ground meat. I have ground beef. The truth is you really could use any kind of ground meat that of your choice. This is a little more of like a warm, savory recipe, but you could do that with ground turkey, ground pork, ground lamb, any sort of ground sausage. We're going to use about a pound. I may not use all of it because I'm going to make a slightly smaller batch for my household today. Get the best quality that your budget allow, ideally organic, grass-fed. If you buy them when they're on sale, you're going to spend anywhere from $5 to $8 a pound. And that's going to make a pretty good size recipe. For the starch, we're going to use quinoa. So quinoa is one of those interesting gluten-free grain. It has a pretty decent nutritional profile. It's a completely unprocessed food. We're going to use the quinoa grains. Quinoa is also very inexpensive, even if you buy it organic, which I believe this one is. And so this whole bag was maybe like $2.80, and we're going to use for my recipe I'm going to use a cup, so that's going to go a fairly long way. Quinoa is one of those things you don't want to put in on the slow cooker for 6 hours. It's going to, the texture and the consistency is going to be really mushy or unpleasant. So this recipe, the prep time is less than 10 minutes. It will cook in about 25 or 30 minutes depending upon the temperature at which you're going to cook that, and that's going to depend on what kind of pot you use. You're going to need some broth of some sort. I have some good organic bone broth. You know, this was probably $2.50. We're going to use, if we use 1 cup of quinoa, we're going to use 2 cups of the liquid, so about $2 worth of broth. For the vegetables, we're going to always use the tried and true onions. I'm going to use half a bag of the onions. A bag is $1.20 where I purchased them, so it's going to be about 60 cents worth of onions. Another vegetable that goes really well with that, it's no more of a savory recipe. You can find frozen zucchini in a lot of the frozen food section. It's just all prepared, nothing added, just zucchinis. I'm going to add a little bit of green beans. I just happen to have these around. So any kind of like nice pre-cut green vegetable will go in this recipe. This is what I have. And another thing I recommend you add is a little bit of a chopped green. I have a little bit of leftover kale from something that I made. It comes washed and chopped, and so I'm going to add about a cup of that. But bottom line, I recommend you have one chopped green vegetable and a cup or a little more than a cup of chopped greens. It could be spinach, it could be kale, it could be collards, whatever you happen to have on hand, or whatever you happen to have accessible at your local grocery store. For condiments, I'm going to suggest a couple different things. So green olives go really well with this recipe. You add them towards the end. They do two things. They add a little bit of flavor. You also want to use a little bit of the brine of the olives. That adds really a wonderful flavor to supplement your broth. This is also an easy way to add a little bit of calories on a budget if you are trying to feed, like teenagers, or you have more people than you have to feed, and you want to try to stretch out the budget of the meat protein. Another way that optional way to also stretch out your food budget by adding a little bit of a combination of a healthy starch and a protein would be to add a can of organic beans. Garbanzos would go well with that, but ultimately whichever bean you like. I'm actually not going to put them in my recipe today. A can of olives, maybe a couple dollars. Organic beans are really inexpensive. You can add a can for about $1.50 tops. So this is what we're going to do. And then the only other condiment I'm going to use, it's a nice savory taste, is sage. If you have it, whatever you have at home, that's a nice savory green. If you have thyme, if you have parsley, would be very nice as well, oregano. I just happen to have sage, and that's what I'm going to use today, but you can freelance on that one. All right, so let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to put this on saute, and I am going to start my timer. Very good. We're going to start with the onions, and for those of you who have been watching a few of our previous recipes, I recommend to always drain the vegetables. It's not crucial in this case because we're making a dish that has some moisture, but oops, I'm going to put my olive oil first. And you can be pretty generous with the olive oil. It's going to prevent things from sticking. So put it like that. Okay. And the next thing that's going to go in is going to be the beef. So I'm going to get that ready, and I'm going to measure out the quinoa. And like I said, it's only 2 of us this week, so I don't want to make too much. We got some runaway quinoa. Maybe a tiny bit more. And you can play around with the proportion. Like, I'm trying to have a little more protein vegetable this week, so I'm not going to use a lot of quinoa, but you certainly could add a little more proportionally. So our onions are going. And I'm actually going to add the sage. So it's all ready to go. And while this browns, I'm already going to get my other vegetables ready. Not too much. And the onions where the juice is going to get. So, if you use broth, be careful not to oversalt, because your broth may already have some salt. So normally I would, if I didn't have any other salt in the broth, I would add my salt right now. I'm not going to. I'm going to wait until the end to taste and see if I even need it. So, good. And then our onions are starting to brown nicely, so I am going to add the meat. This is some ground beef we got from the farm, from the animals, so it's been nourishing us all winter. Obviously you want to wash your hands before you dig in the meat, although we'll cook it pretty hot, so good. It smells so good. Parsley would go really well with that. I just don't happen to have any of that. So while this browns, I'm going to get the broth ready and get my olives. Olive brine is a little trick that I learned late in life. And I wish, I'm thinking about all the good olive brine I've been throwing away. Ideally, if you find them in a jar, like in a glass jar, the brine's probably a little bit healthier for you. Very good. And now, I am going to add the quinoa. I'll let this brown a tiny bit. So I had 1 cup of quinoa. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a total of 2 cups of liquids. The 2-to-1 ratio is about what you need. Depends a little bit on your quinoa actually. Sometimes it soaks up a little more. A little bit of brine. And now I'm going to top it up to 2 cups. You can do, I think, either chicken or beef broth would work well in this. Good. And now I'm going to add my liquid. Very good. And for this recipe, you're going to keep the heat on, you know, to hot or close to hot. I'm going to add my kale, my chopped kale, leftover for something I made last week. And I'm going to do a mix. I haven't had zucchinis in a while, so I think I'm going to... Oh, these are nice in color. I didn't even know that. Cool. Nice. And you know, I don't know that I'm going to add a ton of green beans in this recipe. Maybe a little bit. I'm going to make soup for the week, so I'll just throw the rest of the green beans. Very good. All right. So at this point, you want to set this out to cook. Now, apparently the trick, if you don't want soggy quinoa, is not to use the seal lid on your pot. You want things to evaporate a little bit. So I'm just going to use the lid that's got the little vent hole, and I'm gonna let it slowly cook up. While I clean up the kitchen here for the next few minutes, I'll keep an eye on it. The olives you're going to add towards the end when you're a little closer to ready to eat it. And then if you were to be using your beans, you can put them pretty much any time in the recipe. They're not going to go mushy on you. They're going to be pretty value neutral. But if you want to cook things a little quicker, you probably want to add in the end. So 6 minutes and 45 seconds. So I still have 3 minutes to just throw a few things in some of the wrappers in the garbage and throw a few things in the dishwasher. I really don't have much of a cleanup to say. So this recipe will be ready for you in about 30 minutes, ready to eat and hopefully enjoy. Thanks for joining me. I look forward to seeing you again soon.